Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and today we're taking on some more of the best flat earth documentary. That's right, it's back to Eric Dubay.
Didn't you start this a while back?
Yeah, that's right.
Why haven't you returned to it?
Because listening to his voice is painful.
It's not that bad when you think of it as like ironic comedy.
Huh, is that how you managed to do 3 Flat Earth Fridays in a row on him?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, I'll try it. By the way, want to stick around and give me a hand with this?
Do I have to?
I thought you said that it wasn't so bad when you...
Oh, yeah, I did say that, didn't I? Okay, fine, I'll help you.
Alright then, well, let's get into it.
Ancient civilizations the world over believed Earth to be the flat, immovable center of the universe, around which the heavens revolved daily cycles in perfect circles.
Ah yes, what better place to get all your information from than ancient civilizations that didn't have technology that relies on the Earth being a globe. I find it really odd that flat earthers, and some other people to be honest, hold up ancient civilizations as though they had some kind of knowledge that we're not privy to. Yet they didn't even have things like electricity.
This stable geocentric universe, proven true by experience and experiments, which reigned undisputed for thousands of years.
That's a pretty hefty claim there, Eric. But can you name just one experiment from before the 5th century that supposedly proves that the Earth is not spinning and that the universe is geocentric? You make it sound like it should be pretty easy, so good luck.
Which reigned undisputed for thousands of years, adequately explaining all earthly and celestial phenomena, was violently uprooted, spun around, and sent flying through infinite space by a cabal of sun-worshipping theoretical astronomers.
Well, actually, no. The geocentric model doesn't explain all phenomenon. Just to name a few, it doesn't explain why planets move in the way that they do. It doesn't explain tides. It doesn't explain Earth's magnetic field. And it doesn't explain why objects weigh less at the equator. That's just to name a few. Now, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here and say one thing that it does explain, which is also explained by the standard model of the universe, by the way. And that is eclipses. In the geocentric model, eclipses are caused when the moon goes in front of the sun, and lunar eclipses are caused when the Earth is between the sun and the moon. But Eric Dubay can't have this one because he thinks that the Earth is flat, and this explanation requires the Earth to be a globe. Sorry, Eric.
Early Masonic magicians like Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton.
I must say, I do like the simplicity in Eric Dubay's arguments right here. He's basically saying that all these people that I just mentioned, they're Masons, which means that they're bad, and that they're wrong, and that they're deceiving people. They just are. I guess that means that Newton was wrong about all the physics that get used in things like engineering and construction. You know, things that are vital for our modern world.
Along with their modern Masonic astronaut counterparts like Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, hand in hand with NASA and world Freemasonry, have pulled off the greatest hoax, propagated the most phenomenal lie, and perpetuated the most complete indoctrination in history.
I find it really interesting that he keeps on repeating the same point. It's like he thinks that if he repeats the same point enough, then everybody that is watching his videos will just believe it.
Over the course of 500 years, using everything from books, magazines, and television to computer-generated imaging, a multi-generational conspiracy has succeeded in the minds of the masses to pick up the fixed Earth, shape it into a ball, spin it in circles, and throw it around the sun.
So the first point, which I'm pretty sure I mentioned in the previous video on this, the Earth has been known to be a globe for thousands of years, not just 500. And secondly, do you really expect that to work on people whose job depends on them knowing what the shape of the Earth is? And thirdly, what would even be the point of a conspiracy like this? I mean, I've actually discussed this in length in a previous video of mine.
Island Dave said, if the government or NASA had said to you that the Earth is stationary, imagine that. And then imagine we are trying to convince people that no, it's not stationary. It's moving forward at 32 times rifle bullet speed and spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. We would be laughed at. We would have so many people telling us, you are crazy. The Earth's not moving.
So Eric Dubay here is actually kind of right. If everyone were saying, look, the Earth is stationary, and then a person came along, let's say, I don't know, Galileo, and said, no, the Earth is actually moving, then you can imagine what would happen. Maybe he might get imprisoned for life. Now, as you can probably figure out, I was actually referencing something from the past. But, you know, these days, people aren't being locked up for saying that the Earth is flat. Oh wait, let me rephrase that. People aren't being locked up for saying that the Earth is flat in reasonable ways. So standing outside of a primary school and shouting the earth is flat at kids is not reasonable.
We would be ridiculed for having no scientific backing for this convoluted moving Earth theory. And not only that, but then people would say, oh, then how do you explain a fixed calm atmosphere and the sun's observable movement? How do you explain that? Imagine saying to people, no, the atmosphere is moving also, but is somehow magically velcroed to the moving Earth.
So the way that the movement of the sun is explained is it doesn't actually move. It appears to move because we are moving. And as for, how do you explain a fixed calm atmosphere? You do realise how turbulent the atmosphere is, right? But I do get what he means. Sometimes it can be relatively calm. So how do we explain this? Well, the atmosphere spins along with the Earth. It's that simple.
What we are actually doing is what makes sense. We are saying that the moving Earth theory is nonsense. The stationary Earth theory makes sense, and we are being ridiculed. You've got to picture it being the other way around to realise just how ridiculous the situation is.
But it's not ridiculous, because people used to believe that the Earth didn't spin. Then there were some people that came along saying that Earth did spin, and they gave their reasons for it. At first, they were ridiculed. Some of them were even punished for it. But then people thought, well, hang on, these people do make sense. Their predictions check out. So then people started believing that the Earth does spin. Simple as that. But the difference here is that flat earthers have just come along and said, well, the Earth's not spinning because I can't feel it spinning. They haven't made any predictions, and they most certainly haven't accounted for everything that the globe model accounts for. Mostly because they don't actually know what the globe model accounts for.
This theory from the government and NASA that the Earth is rotating and orbiting and leaning over and wobbling is absolute nonsense.
Which government are we talking about here, Eric? Are we talking about the American government? You know, the one that didn't exist when it was found out that the universe wasn't geocentric. Or maybe we're talking about, I don't know, the Russian government, the one that has long been opposed to the American government.
And yet people are clinging to it tightly, like a teddy bear. They just can't bring themselves to face the possibility that the Earth is stationary.
Well, I think that a lot of people would accept the stationary Earth idea if it was something more than, well, I don't understand it, so therefore it's wrong. Which is essentially your argument.
If the Earth were truly a spinning ball orbiting the Sun, there are several tests and experiments which could be and have been conducted to prove or disprove the veracity of such a claim.
Well then, what are those experiments?
For example, Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe famously argued against the heliocentric theory in his time.
Well, that's only half true. He actually came up with a model of the solar system where the planets were orbiting the Sun, but the Sun was still orbiting the Earth. And keep in mind that he did not think that the Earth was flat.
Positing that if the Earth revolved in an orbit around the Sun, the change in relative position of the stars after 6 months of orbital motion could not fail to be seen. He argued that the stars should seem to separate as we approach and come together as we recede.
It seems that what he is failing to take into account there is that the stars are very far away, and that we wouldn't expect to see them move because they're not close by any stretch of the imagination.
Thomas Winship wrote, if the Earth is at a given point in space on, say, January 1st, and according to present-day science, at a distance of 190 million miles from that point 6 months afterwards, it follows that the relative position and directions of the stars will have greatly changed, however small the angle of parallax may be.
What? The position of the stars will have greatly changed no matter how small the angle of parallax may be. That is one of the dumbest things I have ever heard in my life. Because if the angle of parallax for a given star is, let's say, 1/millionth of a degree, then the position of the star in the sky is barely going to change at all, and it's certainly not going to be noticeable by the human eye. I have no idea in which world 1/millionth of a degree in parallax would be considered a great change in position.
That this great change is nowhere apparent and has never been observed incontestably proves that the Earth is at rest, that it does not move in an orbit around the Sun.
Our survey said...
So Eric Dubay is most definitely wrong here, because parallax of the stars has definitely been observed. It's actually how he managed to figure out the distance to each star. The thing is though, the parallax for each star is less than an arcsecond, which is smaller than what the human eye can resolve.
Samuel Robotham wrote, take 2 carefully bored metallic tubes, not less than 6 feet in length, and place them 1 yard asunder on the opposite sides of a wooden frame or a solid block of wood or stone. So adjust them that their centers of axes of vision shall be perfectly parallel to each other. Now direct them to the plane of some notable fixed star a few seconds previous to its meridian time. Let an observer be stationed at each tube, and the moment the star appears in the first tube, let a loud knock or other signal be given, to be repeated by the observer at the second tube when he first sees the same star. A distinct period of time will elapse between the signals given. The signals will follow each other in very rapid succession, but still the time between is sufficient to show that the same star is not visible at the same moment by two parallel lines of sight when only 1 yard asunder.
So I decided to do some maths for this, and big surprise, it turns out that Samuel Rowbotham is wrong. As it turns out, the time elapsed between each observer seeing the same star in this situation would be about a 50th of a second. That's a very small amount of time there.
A slight inclination of the second tube towards the first tube would be required for the star to be seen through both tubes at the same instant.
I'm sorry, but maths disagrees with you.
Let the tubes remain in their position for 6 months, at the end of which time the same observation or experiment will produce the same results. The star will be visible at the same meridian time without the slightest alteration being required in the direction of the tubes.
Well, I'm pretty sure he's just absolutely wrong here, because the stars change position relative to the sun throughout the year. This is what I like to call being fractally wrong. He's just so wrong in every part of the argument. The conclusion is wrong, however, even if the conclusion were correct, the arguments that he's making to arrive at that conclusion are still wrong.
From which it is concluded that if the Earth had moved 1 single yard in an orbit through space, there would at least be observed the slight inclination of the tube, which the difference in position of 1 yard had previously required.
Well, no, you do not get to make that conclusion after literally every premises that you made to try and reach that conclusion is completely incorrect.
When Tycho Brahe demonstrated that after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax could be detected, desperate heliocentrists, instead of conceding, doubled down, claiming the stars were all actually trillions upon trillions of miles away from us, so distant that no appreciable parallax could ever be detected.
Except parallax has been detected, and it's shown the stars to be light years away from us.
This convenient explanation, which heliocentrists have clung to for centuries, has proven satisfactory to silence the uninquisitive minds of the masses, but still fails to adequately address many observable phenomena, such as our wildly implausible synchronization with Polaris.
What do you mean, though, by our wildly implausible synchronization with Polaris? Do you mean the fact that it's the North Star? Because it wasn't always the North Star.
It matters not the distance of the stars, though we suppose them to be as far off as the astronomer supposes them to be, for as Mr. Richard Proctor himself says, the further away they are, the less they will seem to shift. Why in the name of common sense should observers have to fix their telescopes on solid stone bases so that they should not move a hair's breadth if the Earth on which they fix them moves at the rate of 19 miles in a second?
Because 19 miles a second really isn't that fast. At that rate, you would have to be travelling for nearly 10,000 years to travel a light year.
Another experiment repeatedly performed to disprove Earth's supposed rotation under our feet is firing cannonballs vertically and horizontally in all cardinal directions.
One of the things that I'm wondering is, why cannonballs exactly? Because at this point, cannons are kind of outdated. It's almost as if these ideas were conceived by a mind from medieval times.
If the Earth were truly spinning eastwards underneath us, as the heliocentric model suggests, then vertically fired cannonballs should fall significantly due west. In actual fact, though, whenever this has been tested, vertically fired cannonballs perfectly aimed with a plumb line, lit with a slow match, shoot upwards an average of 14 seconds ascending, 14 seconds descending, and fall back to the ground no more than 2 feet away from the cannon, sometimes directly back into the muzzle. If the Earth were actually spinning at the supposed rate of 600 to 700 miles per hour at the mid-latitudes of England and America, where the tests have been performed, the cannonballs should fall a full 8,400 feet, or over 1.5 miles behind the cannon.
I would very much like to see Eric Dubay working on that, because it kind of sounds like he's talking about the Coriolis effect, but I get a sneaking suspicion that he isn't. But let's assume that he is talking about Coriolis effect for a bit. How far away from the cannon do you think that the ball should land? So I did some calculations, and based on what Eric Dubay said there, the cannonball should land somewhere between 0.5 metre and 1.2 metres away from the cannon. That is definitely a big difference to the 8,400 feet that Eric Dubay expects. And what's more is that my calculations that I did only accounted for Coriolis. They didn't account for other things like wind.
Again, at this point, instead of conceding, desperate heliocentrists triple down, claiming the reason cannonballs fall straight back is because the magical properties of gravity allow Earth to somehow drag the entire lower atmosphere in perfect synchronization with its axial spin, rendering even such breakneck speeds completely unnoticeable to the observer and unmeasurable by experimentation.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the atmosphere does spin with the Earth, and it's not just gravity. It's also the fact that mountains push the atmosphere to spin along with the Earth.
This highly implausible, though clever and convenient explanation only holds for vertically fired cannons, however. If cannons are instead fired and measured in all cardinal directions, even the heliocentrist's atmospheric Velcro trump card becomes unplayable.
I'm not sure why he's bringing the atmosphere into this, because the atmosphere has literally got nothing to do with what he's talking about right now.
North-south firing cannonballs establish a control, then east-firing cannonballs should fall significantly farther than all others, and west-firing cannonballs should fall significantly closer due to the supposed 1,000-mile-per-hour eastward rotation of the Earth.
So Eric Dubay is actually kind of right here, because what he's referring to is the Utvush effect, which is a consequence of Coriolis. Where he's wrong though is in his use of the word significantly, although he doesn't actually attach a value, so maybe he means a few inches are significant.
In actual fact, however, regardless of which direction cannons are fired, north, south, east, or west, the distance covered is always the same.
In that case, instead of using a cannon, why not try using something a bit more modern? I don't know, a high-powered rifle might do the trick. In fact, there's a video that I'll try to remember to link in the description, where a person fires a rifle at a target to his east and a target to his west. Interestingly, the shots fired at the eastward target hit higher, and the shots fired at the westward target hit lower, which is pretty much what Eric Dubay thinks should happen if we live on a spinning ball.
Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "When sitting in a rapidly moving railway carriage, let a spring gun be fired forward, or in the direction in which the train is moving. Again, let the same gun be fired, but in the opposite direction, and it will be found that the ball or other projectile will always go farther in the first case than in the latter. If a person leaps backward from a horse in full gallop, he cannot jump so great a distance as he can by jumping forward. Leaping from a moving sledge, coach, or other object backwards or forwards, the same results are experienced."
So it seems that what he's talking about here is the conservation of momentum, which is a completely different thing to the Utvush effect, by the way. So when it comes to jumping forwards off a moving object or jumping backwards off a moving object, of course when you jump forwards off a moving object, you're going to jump a further distance, but only in relation to the ground. However, in relation to the moving object, you're not going to jump any further depending on the direction that you jump.
Many other practical cases could be cited to show that any body projected from another body in motion does not exhibit the same behavior as it does when projected from a body at rest.
Well, this depends on what reference frame you're using, because there is no such thing as an absolute reference frame.
Nor are the results the same when projected in the same direction as that in which the body moves, as when projected in the opposite direction, because in the former case, the projected body receives its momentum from the projectile force plus that given to it by the moving body, and in the latter case, this momentum minus that of the moving body. Hence, it would be found that if the Earth is moving rapidly from west to east, a cannon fired in due easterly direction would send a ball to a greater distance than it would if fired in a due westerly direction.
Ow! That hurt. So with Eric Dubay, not only does he not understand reference frames, he doesn't seem to understand that the Earth is always rotating. So he is right in saying that if you are on a moving body and you fire a projectile, then the projectile will retain the momentum given to it by the moving body. This is because of a law in physics called the conservation of momentum. It's something that's very important. Now, an important thing to note is that when you fire a projectile on a large moving body, the moving body doesn't just stop, it continues to move. This is because of another law of physics called the conservation of momentum. Oh wait, no, that's the same law that I mentioned earlier. So this means that when you fire a projectile on a moving body, it will always travel the same distance relative to the moving body.
These details of practical experience are utterly incompatible with the supposition of a revolving Earth.
No, Eric, you just don't understand basic physics, or basic logic even.
During the Crimean War, the subject of artillery fire in connection with the Earth's rotation became a hotly discussed topic among military men, scientists, philosophers, and statesmen. Around this time, on December 20th, 1857, British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston wrote to the Secretary of War, Lord Panmure, stating, "There is an investigation which it would be important, and at the same time easy to make, and that is, whether the rotation of the Earth on its axis has any effect on the curve of a cannonball in its flight. One should suppose that it has, and that while the cannonball is flying in the air, impelled by the gunpowder, in a straight line from the cannon's mouth, the ball would not follow the rotation of the Earth in the same manner which it would if lying at rest on the Earth's surface. If this be so, a ball fired in the meridional direction, that is to say, due south or due north, ought to deviate to the west of the object at which it was aimed, because during the time of flight, that object will have gone to the east somewhat faster than the cannonball will have done."
So in case you missed it, Eric Dubay literally just contradicted his own argument. So earlier he was saying that on a globe, cannonballs fired east should go further than cannonballs fired west, but now he's saying that on a globe, cannonballs fired west should go further than cannonballs fired east. This is because he probably doesn't actually understand the quote that he was reading straight out of Zetetic Astronomy. And yes, I know that he got the quote from Zetetic Astronomy, because that's where I found the quote too. Now, as for the point that Eric Dubay is trying to make, it's actually very easy to debunk it. because I did the calculations. Kind of. So based on the 14-second ascent and 14-second descent that Eric mentioned earlier, and not accounting for the Utvush effect, the total amount of difference in distance when firing due east and due west is a maximum of 2.5 meters. So maybe Eric should try doing the calculations before spouting off his nonsense, or at least try to understand what he's reading.
That object will have gone to the east somewhat faster than the cannonball will have done. The trial might be easily made in any place in which a free circle of a mile or more radius could be obtained, and a cannon placed in the center of that circle and fired alternately north, south, east, and west with equal charges would afford the means of ascertaining whether each shot flew the same distance or not.
Oh, no, Eric. You shouldn't be doing that. I just caught you out doing a little naughty. And people are probably wondering what I'm talking about. So let me explain. So as I mentioned earlier, I found the original quote in Zetetic Astronomy. And it turns out that Eric Dubay omitted part of the quote that was actually in Zetetic Astronomy. Let's take a read of what it actually says. In like manner, a ball fired due east ought to fly less far upon the Earth's surface than a ball fired due west, the charges being equal, the elevation the same, and the atmosphere perfectly still. It must be remembered, however, that the ball, even after it has left the cannon's mouth, will retain the motion from west to east which it has before received by the rotation of the Earth on whose surface it was. And it is possible, therefore, that, except at very long ranges, the deviations above mentioned may in practice turn out to be very small, and not deserving the attention of an artilleryman. So this point that Eric Dubay skipped over for some mysterious reason, I wonder why that was, is actually rather important. Because firstly, it mentions different factors that could affect the distance that the cannonball flies, because in case you've forgotten, wind is a thing. And secondly, it mentions that the deviations may be very small, which is definitely not something that fits within the narrative that Eric Dubay is trying to push. So it definitely seems like Eric knew that it didn't fit his narrative and decided to omit it. That is a form of being dishonest, Eric.
More evidence, similar to the cannonball experiment, is found in helicopters and airplanes. If the Earth were spinning several hundred miles per hour beneath our feet, helicopter pilots and hot air balloonists should be able to simply ascend straight up, hover, and wait for their lateral destinations to reach them.
So you know when I said earlier, I guess Newton was wrong about all the physics that we use? That was meant to be a joke. I didn't mean take it literally, because Newton discovered the law that is the conservation of momentum. In fact, earlier, you may not have known it, but you were referencing the conservation of momentum. When something goes up into the air, it retains its momentum from when it was on the ground. You should know this. You were talking about something very similar earlier on. In fact, I remember you doing that. It seems like your video is a jumbled mess of incoherent thoughts.
Since such a thing has never happened in the history of aeronautics, however, haughty heliocentrists must once again rely on Newton's magical atmospheric Velcro.
No, the atmosphere literally has nothing to do with this. All it is the law of the conservation of momentum. That's it!
Claiming the lower atmosphere, up to an undetermined height, somewhere above the reach of helicopters, hot air balloons, and anything not built by NASA, is pulled perfectly along with the rotating Earth, rendering such experiments moot. Granting heliocentrists their atmospheric glue supposition helps them dismiss the results of vertically fired cannonball experiments, but does not and cannot help them explain away the results of horizontal cardinally fired cannonballs.
Well, of course, cannonballs aren't going to do what Eric Dubay thinks that they should do on a globe, because Eric Dubay doesn't seem to have a clue about what he's talking about.
Similarly, granting them their magic Velcro helps dismiss the results of hovering helicopter and hot air balloon experiments, but does not and cannot explain away the results of airplanes flying in cardinal directions. For instance, if both the Earth and its lower atmosphere are supposedly rotating together eastwards 1,038 miles per hour at the equator, then airplane pilots would need to make an extra 1,038 mile per hour compensation acceleration when flying westwards.
No, because they retained their momentum from when they were on the ground. This is something so simple that even a child could understand it.
North and southbound pilots would by necessity have to set diagonal courses to compensate. Since no such compensations are ever necessary, except in the imaginations of astronomers, it follows that the Earth does not move.
So this is actually something that Eric could have tried to formulate a point on if he had been a bit smarter, but instead he's just running with the denying the law of the conservation of momentum. He didn't even try to bring up Coriolis. I mean, he'd still be wrong because a plane isn't ballistic, but it would be better than what he's doing.
Gabrielle Henriette wrote, "If flying had been invented at the time of Copernicus, there is no doubt that he would have soon realized that his contention regarding the rotation of the Earth was wrong, on account of the relation existing between the speed of an aircraft and that of the Earth's rotation."
Well, no, because Copernicus's writings mostly focused on celestial bodies. And besides, I think that he would be smart enough to realize that the arguments you are making hold no water.
It could also be pointed out that such a flying speed of 1,000 miles an hour, which is supposed to be that of the Earth's rotation, has recently been achieved, so that an aircraft flying at this rate in the same direction as that of the rotation could not cover any ground at all. It would remain suspended in midair over the spot from which it took off.
He's just continuing to ramble on without even considering the fact that the conservation of momentum is a thing. This is just too much stupid for me. Okay, Simon Dan, you take over.
The heliocentric theory, literally flying in the face of direct observation, experimental evidence, and common sense, maintains that the ball Earth is spinning around its axis at 1,000 miles per hour, revolving around the Sun at 67,000 miles per hour, while the entire solar system rotates around the Milky Way galaxy at 500,000 miles per hour, and the Milky Way speeds through the ever-expanding universe at over 670 million miles per hour, yet no one in history has ever felt a thing. We can feel the slightest breeze on a summer's day, but never one iota of air displacement from these incredible speeds.
Well, yes, that would be because the Earth's atmosphere travels with Earth. The Earth travels at a constant speed. The Sun travels through the Milky Way at a constant speed. The Milky Way travels at a constant speed. And what do we know about constant speeds, everyone? Physics says we won't feel a thing.
Heliocentrists claim with a straight face that their ball Earth spins at a constant velocity, dragging the atmosphere in such a manner as to perfectly cancel all centrifugal, gravitational, and inertial forces, so we do not feel the tiniest bit of motion, perturbation, wind, or air resistance. Such backpedaling, damage control, reverse-engineered explanations certainly stretch the limits of credibility in the imagination, leaving much to be desired by discerning minds.
Again, constant speed. But remember, linear speed is not what matters here. It's angular velocity, which is...
a 15-degree-per-hour drift.
Thanks, Bob.
David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "Dear reader, do you feel the motion? I trow not, for if you did, you would not so quietly be reading my book. I doubt not you have been, like myself, on a railway platform when an express train rushed wildly past at the rate of 65 miles per hour, when the concussion of the air almost knocked you down. But how much more terrible would be the shock of the Earth's calculated motion 1,000 times faster than the speed of the railway express?" Thomas Winship wrote, "Let imagination picture to the mind what force air would have, which was set in motion by a spherical body of 8,000 miles in diameter, which in 1 hour was spinning round 1,000 miles per hour, rushing through space at 65,000 miles per hour, and gyrating across the heavens. Then let conjecture endeavor to discover whether the inhabitants on such a globe could keep their hair on. If the Earth globe rotates on its axis at the terrific rate of 1,000 miles per hour, such an immense mass would of necessity cause a tremendous rush of wind in the space it occupied. The wind would go all one way, and anything like clouds which got within the sphere of influence of the rotating sphere would have to go the same way.
The people who wrote those books seem to be as uneducated as you, Eric.
The fact that the Earth is at rest is proved by kite flying. If the Earth and atmosphere are constantly revolving eastwards at 1,000 miles per hour, how is it that clouds, wind, and weather patterns casually and unpredictably go every which way, often traveling in opposing directions simultaneously? Why can we feel the slightest westward breeze, but not the Earth's incredible supposed 1,000 mile per hour eastward spin? And how is it that the magic Velcro of gravity is strong enough to drag miles of Earth's atmosphere along, but weak enough to allow little bugs, birds, clouds, and planes to travel freely unabated in any direction?
Wow, that was a lot of whatabouts, wasn't it? Well, I only need one. What about the fact that you've misunderstood the physics involved with our atmosphere? Easy, isn't it, Eric?
It is a fact well known to aeronauts that several strata of atmospheric air are often moving in as many different directions at the same time. On almost any moonlit and cloudy night, different strata may be seen not only moving in different directions, but, at the same time, moving with different velocities, some floating past the face of the moon rapidly and uniformly, and others passing gently along, sometimes becoming stationary, then starting fitfully into motion, and often standing still for minutes together.
Wind is, of course, what drives the clouds' movements, and wind is a product of the pressure systems. Pressure systems are within the Earth's atmosphere, the atmosphere which rotates with the Earth at a constant speed.
In his book South Sea Voyages, Arctic and Antarctic explorer Sir James Clark Ross described his experience on the night of November 27, 1839, and his conclusion that the Earth must be motionless. The sky being very clear, the planet Venus was seen near the zenith, notwithstanding the brightness of the meridian sun. It enabled us to observe the higher stratum of clouds to be moving in an exactly opposite direction to that of the wind, a circumstance which is frequently recorded in our meteorological journal, both in the northeast and southeast trades, and has also been observed by former voyagers. Captain Basil Hall witnessed it from the summit of the peak of Tenerife, and Count Strzelecki, on ascending the volcanic mountain of Carenia, in Oahe, reached at 4,000 feet, an elevation above that of the trade wind, and experienced the influence of an opposite current of air of a different hygrometric and thermometric condition.
It's well known that wind can change direction at different altitudes. Your point is irrelevant.
Now, if the Earth were a globe revolving through space west to east at a rate of 19 miles in a second, the clouds appearing to us to move towards the east would have to move quicker than 19 miles in a second to be thus seen, whilst those which appear to be moving in the opposite direction would have no necessity to be moving at all, since the motion of the Earth would be more than sufficient to cause that appearance. It only takes a little common sense to show us that it is the clouds that move, just as they appear to do, and that therefore the Earth is motionless.
No, what it takes is a complete misunderstanding of how the Earth and the atmosphere works.
Heliocentrists believe the world beneath their feet is spinning at a mind-numbing 1,038 miles per hour at the equator, while perfectly pulling the entire atmosphere along for the ride. Meanwhile, at the mid-latitudes of USA and Europe, they believe the world and atmosphere spin around 900 to 700 miles per hour, decreasing gradually all the way down to 0 miles per hour at the north and south poles, where the stagnant atmosphere apparently never moves, completely escaping the grips of gravity's magic Velcro. This means at all latitudes, every inch of the way, the atmosphere manages to perfectly coincide with the supposed speed of the Earth, compensating from 0 miles per hour at the poles all the way up to 1,038 miles per hour at the equator, and every speed in between. These are all lofty assumptions heliocentrists make without any experimental evidence to back them up.
Again, it's the angular velocity we're concerned with, not the linear speed. And that angular velocity is 15 degrees per hour. Thank you and good night. Anyway, that seemed like it went on forever. How long was Eric banging on about the fact he didn't understand Coriolis?
About 12 minutes.
12 minutes? Bloody hell.
Yeah, and it was at 1.5 times speed.
Yeah, you can handle the rest on your own.
Before heliocentric indoctrination, any child will look up to the sky and notice that the sun, moon, and stars all revolve around a stationary Earth.
Well, children can think things and be wrong. Eric, I hope you're not getting all your information from children. That would be embarrassing.
All evidence from our perspective clearly demonstrates that we are fixed, and the heavenly bodies circle around us.
Well, A, that's just simply not the case. And B, you don't have a model for when each of the planets will be visible, which is the whole reason why we stepped away from geocentrism in the first place.
We feel the Earth as motionless, and observe the sun, moon, stars, and planets to be moving entities.
Well, humans don't feel motion, we only feel acceleration, so of course we're not going to feel the Earth moving. As for the sun, stars, moon, and planets being moving entities, well, yeah, they are, just not in the way that you think they are.
To suspend this common-sense geocentric perspective and assume that it is actually the Earth rotating beneath us daily while revolving around the sun yearly is quite a theoretical leap to take without any empirical evidence to land on.
Except there's heaps of evidence for it. Just ask Bob.
But what we found is when we turned on that gyroscope, we found that we were picking up a drift, a 15 degree per hour drift.
Thanks, Bob. When you choose to ignore evidence, that evidence doesn't magically disappear.
Alan Daves said, "Ignorant folk think that such minority opinions as geocentrism are conspiracy theories."
Well, yes, they are conspiracy theories in the way that people generally use the word conspiracy theory. They don't have any backing in reality.
The very people who would call geocentrists quack conspiracy theorists are either themselves completely ignorant of even modern cosmological axioms and principles of gravitation and mechanics, or they are just playing stupid, hoping no one will notice or call their bluff.
Well, sometimes people just don't care about what the shape of the Earth is or whether the Earth is the center of the universe because they're just living their life. For some people, the idea of Jar Jar Binks being a Sith Lord is far more important than whatever the shape of the Earth is.
What's even more hilarious is the fact that even folk like Stephen Hawking and a few intellectually honest physicists and cosmologists who would read what we are saying and are capable of understanding it know that what we have been saying is absolutely true. Not only do they admit that, but even snicker about it to each other.
Generally, when I see people saying that Einstein or Stephen Hawking knew that the Earth was flat and they admitted it, it's either a misunderstanding of what they said or a cherry-picked quote.
But they won't dare to address that too openly with dumb, ignorant masses. Best not to confuse the common folk with unnecessary information and facts.
Well, the reason why they don't say that Earth is the center of the universe is because, surprise, Earth isn't the center of the universe.
Even more sad are all the others out there who don't have a clue what I'm saying here and shake their heads thinking they know something about physics that tells them that the Earth moves.
Says the person that doesn't know anything about physics and was just ignoring the law of conservation of momentum. Yeah, buddy, we're the people that don't know anything about physics.
If only they studied the textbooks and peer-reviewed papers a little closer, they would realize just how absolutely ignorant with a capital I that argument really is.
No, Eric, you're the one that needs to read the textbooks because you don't understand anything. You have just been wrong throughout this entire video. You're so wrong that you would even be wrong on opposite day.
It is part of the natural physics of water and other fluids to always find their level and remain flat.
Nope! That's it for today. No more. I've got to preserve my sanity. So, leave a like and subscribe if you like this video. Leave a comment letting me know what you think. Is Eric Dubay lying, ignorant, or both? As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons. What Jesus, Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, Jane Spade, Wolfie, Morrie, and the Friendly Antinatalist. If you want to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. A link should appear there soon. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching.
Yeah, here's the thing.
Circling over and
It's
around
interesting
360
that as
degrees.
humans, if there's something aliens. Oh, that's they got the
Depending
explanation.
how far north the observer is, the sun can be seen for several days or weeks.